Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Show Up with Cameron Gran. I am your host, Cameron Gran. And before we dive in, just a reminder, I'm not a therapist. I'm just somebody going on his own mental health journey, trying to give you guys little tips and tricks that you guys can try or leave, because only you know what will work in your brain. I just am trying to give you guys things that you can try when you are struggling, because that would have been really beneficial for me when I was struggling. So I'm just trying to give back to a system that helped me in my dark times. I will say as we go throughout this episode, if you hear me sniffle, I'm sorry. I don't have time to like edit them out because I'm on a deadline. I I am a little sick, so we're gonna forgive that. But I just wanted to forewarn you guys so you're not like, why is he sniffling up in my ear? That's why. As we begin, the first thing I wanted to bring up is I've talked before about the power of cleansing your environment. I cannot tell you like how many months and months went by in my apartment where I was surrounded by trash, and then like not trashy trash, but like things that I told myself I was going to sort through, but in reality they were just things that I was laying out. So there was no like pathways. It was like, oh, I if there was a fire, I could go out my back door, but not now because now I have a bunch of trip hazards. And then my this is literally a reasoning. I was like, it's fine. You know what's gonna happen? I'm gonna be grateful for this pile of stuff in front of my back door because if somebody tries to break in, no way am I not gonna hear them trip because we're playing Home Alone now. We're like we gotta set up booby traps so if somebody tries to break into my house, they don't get any of my goodies. Okay, I want to be aware and present if they try, so I can be like, haha, you thought that this was a clean apartment? Well, boy, were you mistaken. Yeah, that's the kind of mindset I was in, and to support the fact that I wasn't cleaning my apartment. And then behind me, you can't really see, but like I even cleaned my kitchen. And to tell you how bad that was, well, you know how like flies are a thing if things are dead. Well, I had a lot of mold and like hidden mold because if you're out there and you hate doing dishes, let me do you a favor. Do not put water in the pan until you're planning to actually do them, because if you do, all I will say is it turns into a breeding ground, and all of a sudden you're at the home of a million flies. So don't do it, and until you're like, tonight at 7, I'm doing the dishes. Okay, a couple of hours maybe, because like I have had pans that are like they're crusty. You can't really get them off unless you let them soak for a little bit. But it was just bad. Let me just say that. And what I realized is there comes a point in life where our brain just accepts our like surroundings. And so I didn't realize because I've spoken about before about how like my environment does have effect on my mentality, and I was like, oh, I'm okay with it because of all the reasons I've shared. And then I finally cleaned because I still have my bedroom to go, but I finally cleaned like the areas that I spend the most time in. And then it was like I woke up in a whole new world because I was like, what is this place with all this extra room? Like now I have like arm stretching space. It's a lot, and I'm like, what have I done differently? What has changed? And the only thing that changed is I cleaned. And like I there are things that we have to sort through in our life that like we prioritize our main things first. But my tip for that is if you have stuff that you need to sort through, don't just let it be a pile on the ground. Put it like take some time and like organize the pile and be like, hey, we're gonna see the pile, but it's gonna be organized so it looks nice while we sort through the stuff that's gonna take us some time to go through because I'm still sorting through like my mother's storage stuff because it's hard for me to go through because my mom passed away from an overdose. It's gonna be I think 2 years in November. I think it was November 4th is when she passed away. But we found journals when I went through her storage units, and that's kind of why I've been reluctant to go through them because I don't know what I found. The stuff I did find are hilarious, but I can't tell you because we're on YouTube and like the radio. But some things I'm like, parents, I'm going to say this just as a PSA. Parents, if you have things that are shameful that you don't want your grown children to see, please don't put them in storage units that you know you're never going to go through. Like, that's all I will say is I'm like, my mom, like, because I'm like, you weren't going to go through them. You told us that you wanted us to go through these things without you while you were alive. And if you knew that, why are you leaving these little things that, like, these little trinkets for us to find. Use your imagination with what I'm referring to there, but just please don't include that. Like, if don't put that in your storage unit. Like those are personal items, and then you put a little post-it note on the box where you put your personal items, and you just tell anybody that finds this box, burn, don't look inside. That's all I'll say. I'm gonna leave it there. But that's why I've been avoiding it. Not the thing I just said, but like just the fact that my mom has journals that are referencing her overdose problems. Not her problems with drug use. Sorry. If I'm scatterbrained, it's because I told you guys I'm a little sick, and I'm trying to fight through it because again, procrastination nation wants to make us not do anything, but I'm fighting through it because if I can just get over the upstream and get to the part where it goes down again, I know there'll be easy sailing. Look at me acting like I fish or I use a boat. I can't afford those things, but I can have an imagination that can. This is gonna be a problem for this episode, but we're gonna continue. Persevere. This episode, I wanted to dive into like fables and stories revolving around witches because we're in Halloween. But I wanted to start the episode by just acknowledging like a good thing that I did, which was clear my environment, so that way when I exit, I feel like I'm awash with opportunity. Because anybody out there who's ever played a video game or been inside for many, many days, not seeing the outside, not like getting those rays of sun, you know what it's like. Because I did that when I was growing up. I think I went an entire week without going outside. And then randomly, I walked outside and then I felt my skin like unlock a door, throw up the trap. Like it was like literally all my pores opened up. And then they're like, sunlight, yes. People don't think that humans can photosynthesize. Well, guess what? We're photosynthesizing this right now because you need your vitamin D and you've been denying it for too long, Cameron. Too long. And so then I just, like, it's that kind of sensation is what happened when I finally cleaned my place, is because I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that I was this down. But now that all this stuff is gone, I'm like, oh, I was that far down, you know? It's like you don't realize until you get rid of something how bad it really is. And then moving on from that, the thing I want to talk about is I'm going to dive into stories, but mostly revolving around like the lessons of witch stories, because I want to do Halloween's thing and I love witches. And I'm going to probably dance around the map because there are good witches, there are bad witches, there are like awesome, the best kind of witches. And I'm just in a witchy mood, so I wanted to talk about that mostly because I'm really excited for the Agatha All Along series finale this Wednesday. Not a promo, no pay, but I'm just so excited to see it. And it's just one of those things where I'm like, oh, all the possibilities of things that this could mean, especially when it comes to like morality and storytelling and just, I don't know. I love dissecting things along those levels. Like for instance, one of like the early stories with witches is Hansel and Gretel. For anybody who doesn't know what Hansel and Gretel is, that's the story of two little kids who go like walking through the woods. I think they're trying to get home because they're using breadcrumbs in case they get lost. And they stumble upon this house that's made of candy. And instead of running and going away, they're like, oh, well, this lady must be nice because she loves candy and we love candy. So they go inside her house, and then like it ends up being a witch who like throws them in a cauldron and and cooks them. Long story short. But the moral of that story is more of like, just because you find somebody else who shares one of your interests doesn't mean they gotta be your best friend. That seems like it's especially right now, you know. What's that again? Sorry. Especially right now in internet culture, I feel like so many people just like up and like meet people like and not the right way. They're not like, let's go to like a public safe place. I was guilty of this because I am gullible and I have accepted that about myself, and now I'm trying to like put steps into place so I can't be gullible anymore. I mean, obviously, we all have these certain pathways that were created that if you don't walk that path, you're never going to know how to look out for it. So, except for that, I'm trying to, like, not allow myself to be too trusting because I want to believe the best in people. And then when I distrust somebody, it's usually because they're walking a path that's very similar to paths that have been like bad for me in the past. And so the so like the reason why I brought that up is because when Hansel and Gretel, the only thing they have in common with this person that they knock on the door is the fact that they both love candy. No other reason should those kids have stayed there. I mean, sure, she's a woman, and then they're like, "Oh, mother maternal instinct maybe is," but even then, it's like, "No, that's a stranger to you, my friend. You don't know them. Why are you agreeing to go into their house?" Uh, so I guess also don't go to somebody else's house that you don't know. But it is a juxtaposition now because as a kid you are kind of thrown into school where you're surrounded by strangers and you're told to talk to them and find people with common interests, and then once you have that, then you go and meet them at their house or like, well, because that's where playdates are from. And that's kind of the thing, is like it is strange that once you're out of school it's kind of is the opposite, where you're like, nope. Even if I've talked for a while online, I need to make sure that like our friendship is real. It's not like some manipulation for the internet's sake. Because if anybody has watched the show Catfish, the amount of people that will waste time just like being mean online or just pretending to be in love with people for no reason other than attention is astounding to me. But it's kind of like, no, you should probably should make sure that you actually have this like joy with somebody else, and that they're actually looking to be in your best interest in the long run. Gosh, I might not post the video of this because it's getting a little snotty. TMI, I know, but this might just be an audio episode even on YouTube because I don't know how to stop it. The thing that I like about Hansel and Gretel is mostly because it's like it's a good story to like have kids realize that just because somebody like shares your interest, like in this instance it's candy, and I think that kids nowadays know not to just take candy from strangers. It's been around, and like even if you haven't told your kid, there's enough content online, like TV shows and movies that have talked about the dangers of accepting that kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of in like the main line of society's mind, is like just don't do that thing. Like I still check like my candy when it's Halloween for like issues, like hidden things that will like destroy your gums. If anyone watched Halloween 2, that there's an example of that where like a kid goes to the hospital because there were razor blades in his candy. But like that was in the 1980s. I don't know any story of that actually happening in current time, but that happening was perpetuated so much that now it's just part of society. And I feel like it's the same thing where like, oh, well, now that we know not to trust strangers, how do we meet people and becomes friends with them? And usually that's by public outings, and like sports are a good thing where you're like, oh, we have a shared interest and we're learning from each other and we're just growing like that. The one thing that I want to say about like if you do try to meet somebody online is just make sure you tell as many people as you can, because a lot of people don't want to do that because they're like, I don't want to violate somebody's privacy. But like telling people their name, their username, where you met them, where you're going to meet them, like what, because some people are like, oh, I met them on this app, and then like, okay, and then where are you going to meet? Like just tell somebody, so that way if it does turn out to be bad, you have like, hey, you can do something to me, but I told people where I am, the address you told me, where we're gonna be. I'm being tracked right now. So if you try something, just know you're not gonna get away with it. People will be coming for you. And this is my planning side coming into play, because like I used to have a lot of shame about dating because I'm like, well, I don't want to violate somebody else's like privacy, but then I'm like, well, I also don't want to be like killed. This is turning into like a murder podcast, which I guess it's Halloween and like that is a scary aspect, but it like those are just some things that I've learned with just being an adult in 2024, is like you got to look out for yourself, because things can turn bad and you don't always know when it's going to, and so trying to like have enough things out there to protect you is very good. For instance, another good one about witches is just The Witches by Roald Dahl. In that story, it's the story about this kid who doesn't want to like he's going with his aunt or his grandma somebody somewhere, and he wants to go do something alone, and then he actually stumbles upon like the High Council of Witches who turned him into a mouse, and his friend was turned because he was eating things that he shouldn't have been, but he was turned because he heard the story of what witches were planning to do with all the children, and I think that the point of the witches is more of like, even when things are down and you feel alone, if you continue to fight against the like odds of your success, you're more likely to be better. Like, because after he gets turned into a mouse, instead of just accepting him being a mouse, because his friend's kind of losing it and becoming more and more like a mouse because he's like forgetting what it means to be a kid. And so he like has to bring his friend to his grandma, I think, and it's his grandma or his aunt, I can't remember. And then the three of them had to plan to get rid of the witches and then hopefully turn them back into humans. But like the moral of that story is just like, yeah, you should stick together with people when it gets hard, because isolation makes it harder to win against extreme odds. And I can agree with that because, and like, you don't know where the help could come from, because in this example it is family, but like when I was doing DPT and my struggle, my issue was the fact that I didn't really have that family support group. And so but being open to try to find a support group can be very helpful, because again, you don't know unless you ask where help can come from. Gosh dang it. Sorry. Pardon moi. I apologize for the delay. I just needed 2 seconds to clear my nose. Gosh, I have never been this like. It's never happened to me before while trying to get something done. It is remarkable. But I'm going to continue now. Sorry. Back to it. And then another story, which is more about good witches, is like anybody who's ever seen the original show of Charmed, that tells more of like the mantra of what Wicca is, which is like harm none, do what ye will. Because that's the story of like three sisters who become the charmed ones, which gives them magical powers, and like they fight against the forces of darkness. That's the spiel. But the main point of it is like, how can you help your fellow man and through very hard things. And what I like about that show is it has, one, it has to do with witches, but also it has to do with sisterhood. And I think that the value in staying by somebody's side even when you're fighting or when you're struggling, because a lot of times if you pull away from somebody, you don't have the opportunity to fix whatever went wrong. Whereas if you just spend more time than you think just trying to listen, you might discover something that you misheard or something that got out of place. And what I love about that show is it definitely talks more along the lines of what destiny and fate is. And it doesn't like really dive into like a specific religion, but a lot of the story has to do with like helping people by being selfless, because there are consequences to magic, and usually that has to do when you do something for personal gain, which is one of the mantras of actual Wicca. If you've researched it at all, is just the fact that like you can help others, but when you do something bad to somebody else, is also from the craft. If you do something bad to somebody else, that thing will come back to you tenfold. So it's kind of bridges the line of what karma is, which is like whatever you put out, whatever you send out into the universe will come back to you at some point. Which I've always admired those like those details, because it's like I can't control somebody else, but sometimes people have treated me bad, and I haven't treated them the way they've treated me, because to me that's just pushing that energy that hurt me so much further out and doing more harm to the universe. So usually that's why I separate myself when things are going negatively, because I'm like, hey, I could allow this person who's like yelling at me and wanting to make me feel crap to like turn a switch in me and put that emotion and that anger and that reaction, and I throw it back on them. Or I could just listen and say, okay, yeah, go ahead, keep talking. I don't know, like when you're like you're pretending to listen but you're not really listening. Don't placate somebody because when you're in that situation, because that's usually like when things go awry is when you're like egging them on a little bit. But my thing is like, how can I solve an issue? Like for DBT specifically, especially with Dear Man, like the whole point is you listen to the problem first, you figure out what solutions are available, and then you compromise on that solution with other people. And for the original show, that's very much what it is about. Is it's like, oh, well, they know about witchcraft and magic, but people, the innocents they're helping, don't, and so they have to teach them about it and then present options to help them. But if they don't want to accept those options, they also allow somebody to make their own choices. For instance, there is an episode of Charmed about three brothers who could become the charmed ones for for the source of all evil. But the reason why they don't is because one of the brothers chooses to become a reverend instead, and by doing that, it cancels his ability to become a demon. But the reason why that was important is because his choice to not follow into those ranks made it so he also had to sacrifice like a personal life with somebody, because one of the sisters is like hinting that they could have been together, but they chose to forego those things for the more, I guess, selfless thing to do, which would be to make it so this source of like ultimate evil couldn't exist. So it's kind of like choosing the many over the one. There's even an episode of Charmed. I can talk about Charmed all day. Let me just tell you. There's also an episode of Charmed where there's like the question of if you're in like a business and it catches fire, is it better to save your sister, one person, or is it better to save that business of strangers? Like if you could guarantee that by saving you could either only save your sister or do something so everybody else survived but her. And that's like, and that question is like very like prevalent throughout that episode, because we all want to like keep our family, but if like there are things that we do that should be for the betterment of mankind rather than the benefit of just one person. And that's kind of what I loved about that show, is it does definitely dive into the importance of being selfless. And then they made a remake of it, and my major issue with it, because I've watched every episode. This isn't just me being like, "Oh, they did a remake and they didn't need to." It was more the fact that I watched every episode, and everything that had to do with magic had to do with how was magic affecting them specifically, and nothing to do with like the other magical beings, the other people in the world. Like there was nothing specifically like that. It was all plot driven, and like Charmed, the original, was like, oh, we're plot driven, but we're also make sure that the people, the innocents, matter in every episode that they appear in. And I think that that is a stronger television, because we don't know what somebody else is going through, and so it can be very easy to like, I think, only focus on ourselves. And so that kind of is what that show taught me, is it's like I can focus on myself, or I can put aside my own issues and listen to this person in front of me and hear what they have going on and see if I can do anything to help them. It's why I love talking to people about their issues, but everyone's like, for some reason other people are taught like, oh, we don't talk about that stuff because we don't want to put our burden on other people. And me, I'm like, well, no, if we're friends and if friends are supposed to be like another step in family, then I want your burden and I want you to have my burden, because we're both going through this life together and I want us to support each other. I don't want to be a one-way like glass, if that makes sense. Like if we're like a glass is half full or half empty, but like if I'm pouring into your glass and you're never pouring back into mine, then your glass is just going to overflow and you're going to do something, I don't know, because you're not leaving any room for you, because I've just poured all my issues into you. And that's why if you pour back and forth, then at least like we're sharing in that, and so there's room for us to like fill more of what we need. And that's what I like about that show. Another good show is uh just to talk about more witches that I love. The Vampire Diaries, Bonnie. I think Bonnie is the biggest example of also selflessness, because most of the times you think she would choose to protect herself, but that character has died more than any other character on television. It's not if it was only once, then I'd be like, spoiler. I'm telling you that if you want to see a witch die and then come back to life and then die again, and then you're like, wow, at a certain point, you'd think they just would want her on the show, but nope, they just really don't like this character to be alive. There's like a good plot device with her like trying to come back to life, and I guess perseverance is a word that comes to mind with that because a lot happens to Bonnie, and then the more that happens to her, the more her power grows. But it still is just like, okay, well, I get that we can like suffer, but I would hope that we should also have good times, which is another thing from DBT. Is sometimes we have to remind ourselves that there are opportunities for good times in the present moment, because Bonnie's a good example of it seeming like there's never going to be a good thing. It's always going to be bad. Because it can feel that way sometimes where you don't think that you're ever going to have like a good moment because everything seems to be going wrong for you. And I felt that way very much. Like it is 2024. I came to Minnesota in 2020 because I was in a bad world. And I think that this month might be the first time where I felt like things are getting back where they should be. Took me 4 years to feel like I did before I left New York City. Ironically, I left New York City because I thought my mom was in trouble, but then that just uncovered like all the like things I talked about at the beginning of the episode where she had problems with drugs. But I wish that I had known that it wasn't something, because like my mom never was willing to talk to me about that. And like if you want to support somebody through that kind of stuff, they have to be willing to talk to you about it, and they have to be willing to like be honest. And like that we reference the show Mom. I watch episodes, I talk about them to you because it's a good example of what. That's when I feel like I could step in with my family, is when they're talking about it, because until you're talking about it, you're just dancing around and not being real people, because it's this huge rift that with somebody else, that if you don't acknowledge it, if it's not something that's being acknowledged constantly, it's like you're only half pretending to actually be in a room with somebody because you're not giving them your full selves, because you can't be fully honest. Another good example of witches is I love The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. If you know C.S. Lewis, most of his stories are like retellings of certain fables in the Bible. And The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is kind of a medley of a couple of different stories. But the biggest one reminds me of like Jesus passing away on the Christ and like forgiving sin, because Edmund, when he comes to Narnia, he like betrays his sister, and then gets taken prisoner by the witch because he's a traitor. And so anybody who's a traitor in Narnia is obligated to the witch, who's kind of like the symbol of what the devil is. And it's kind of like an uplifting story about like, oh, well, like family is strong, and like we can do terrible things, but there is way of redemption. But like if people are fighting to redeem you, then you need to believe in yourself that you're worthy of being redeemed. I And I also just love Tilda Swinton. She's just amazing in that movie. But like the reason why I like the White Witch so much is she's so unashamedly like villainous. And I mean to the point where she knows the laws of what is good and what is bad. And so that's also where you're like, oh, be careful what you sign, be careful what you agree to, be careful who you meet. And just because, again, another example, because Edmund meets the witch and she gives him treacle tart or Turkish delight, and then that's what swindles him, because it once you eat that, there's a spell on Turkish delight, so like he won't be able to like not be obsessed with having more of it. But it is another example of like witches like giving somebody something sweet or something that they love to twist them into giving them what they want, rather than being like a true motherly figure. Because at this time, and this story is based, it's like the four Pevensey children are taking sanctuary with the professor because their parents are dealing with the war, And so Edmund's kind of at a loss trying to find a motherly figure, and you can even see it in the scenes with Tilda Swinton that he kind of is trying to replace his mother with the witch, and then like again, it's like we all have these scars that if we're not careful with who we share those scars with, they can turn and use those things against us. I wanted to talk more, like a full 45 minutes, but it's getting worse, and I don't want to like get cough more. So I'm gonna end this episode at 30 minutes, but I had more stuff about witches, but like I can't do it. It's getting worse and worse. So hopefully next week I can dive into more like stories and fables and give you more of a breakdowns of things like that because I really like lessons that you can learn from television and shows because they're kind of what raised me and what taught me what right and wrong is. And so with that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. But before you go, as you grow throughout the week, don't forget to show up for yourself because you matter.